to see you. Thanks for joining us. I think we'll give it maybe another minute before we officially start, as I see the numbers still continue to climb. We look forward to sharing our plans with you in just a minute. Okay, good morning and welcome. It's so nice to see everybody. Finally see, I missed seeing so many faces and getting to see everybody out and about in the district. So glad we could meet this way, even if not in person yet. But that time is drawing closer, so very excited about that. I do thank you for taking the time this morning. I know it's always tough to find time. We tried to set this after arrival in the hopes that you could have the busy morning of getting your kids set up and ready to go, whether they were coming in or getting set up on distance learning, so that we could just take some time today to go over the new plans that we announced. As I said to the board last night, it's hard to believe that a year ago, really today, a year ago to the date, we made the announcement that we'd be closing temporarily to assess the situation, and realized at that point that we hadn't actually fully reopened again now for a year. So it's a tough anniversary for all of us, but it is exciting to be on that anniversary, talking about how we're going to bring all of our students back. So I'm really happy to be having that conversation with you today. Just so I can kind of gauge a little bit of background knowledge for those who do have your cameras on. How many of you were able to see the presentation last night? If you could just, if you saw it last night, show me your hand. Okay, we've got a few, but not a ton. So I think what I'm going to do, so bear with me if you would, those who saw it last night. I'm going to try to quickly move through the presentation that was shared last night, so that we can then, so you get some background or base information, and then we will definitely have time after that for questions and answers. I'm going to ask, since our group is over 60 now, that folks would put questions into the chat. And my colleague, Alex Wolf, our public information officer, has agreed to kind of help moderate the chat once we get on the other side of the presentation. So please do continue to do that. If we've got time, we may be able to open the mic as well once we get to that question and answer part. One of the things that I've already discovered in some of the questions that have come in even from last night, there are often unique circumstances that may be either unique to your family or unique situation that may have building level really be better addressed at the building level. So I would just ask that, as you're thinking about your questions, certainly kind of the big picture, the general framework of what the district's plan is, this is a perfect forum for that. But if you've got unique situations to your child, or your family, those may, or if it's something specific to how things are going to work logistically at one of the buildings, you may be better off just reaching out to your principals for those. But certainly, we'll do our best here. And I think many of the administrators are on the call today, especially I see our building administrators, and they are still along with us in the process of figuring out all the final details. I will give that caveat at the beginning today that we've made some big decisions. And that's what we presented to the board last night, because we know those were a timely nature. But there's still a lot of detail planning that needs to go on, especially at the specific building level. So we may not have all answers today, and I just want to put that out there up front. But certainly those questions that we're not able to answer today, we will answer and follow up, whether it's through the principals, through district communication, or even individual emails as appropriate. So with that, I'm going to dive in and share my screen. And as I said, do my best to move through this quickly so we can get to questions. And Alex, can you just confirm to me that that you can see this?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. Okay. So as we've approached the planning for reopening of schools, these were the factors really since the beginning whether it was last summer or now, this is really what we've had to keep in mind. Um, the well-rounded holistic health and wellness of our students first and foremost, at the same time, holistic wellness of our staff, because without our staff, we don't have anyone here to teach our students. So that's been a big piece of our decision making all the way along. How can we best deliver a quality curriculum in an equitable manner? And then how do we do all these things within the guidelines under which we have to work? So just for a little bit of background, the administrators from the time that we actually from about a week prior to the shutdown, the administrators went into high gear, starting with planning on curriculum resources instruction. Throughout the summer, we worked diligently to figure out how we were going to open school in the fall. And as you all know, we've been running our hybrid model since September. We have continued to meet internally at the administrative level to assess how things are going, make various tweaks along the way. So then fast forward to January, where again, we were meeting and looking at how are we going to bring students back with the goal of bringing them back this spring so that it was, as opposed to waiting till next fall. So we had been meeting internally. We broadened that discussion to a task force made up of community members, that medical professionals, mental health professionals, folks who have backgrounds in operations and logistics and communications. And that's been really a wonderful group to run our ideas by and to get their feedback and perspective that's helped us to shape this initial presentation. The task force work will be continuing over the next couple of weeks as we head towards actually implementation of the reopening. These are the basic questions that we spent our time looking at and really trying to hone in on how do we resolve some of these issues to make sure that we can reopen our schools safely. And these are some of the big learnings that we came away with. When we were working on reopening back in June, that's when the guidance first came out about what the Department of Health guidelines that we would be required to work under, as well as the New York State Department of Education guidelines. What would those require? How could we then open schools in some fashion? And at the time, as a region in particular, and in collaboration with the Westchester County Department of Health, we took a pretty conservative approach to the guidelines, given that this was all new. None of us had lived through a pandemic or really had to open schools during a pandemic. So the guidance, we took the most conservative reading of it, which called for 6 feet of social distancing. And obviously that's what we're supposed to be doing in banks and grocery stores and everywhere in life. So it makes sense. What we have learned a lot since then is there's been a lot of research that's come out over the last year, international, national, and local research that's come out to show us what is effective in schools, what is not effective in schools, and how do we manage risk. It's I think we all recognize there's no way to eliminate risk, but how do we best manage risk and balance the different competing interests of mental health, wellness, social, emotional needs of students, as well as the physical health of students and staff? How do we manage all that and manage risk at the same time? So we've learned a lot over these last months, and there are studies showing that a distance of 3 to 6 feet is still a manageable risk within schools. So it gave us an opportunity to look back and revisit that initial stance that we took back in June. We also have learned from colleagues in other parts of the state who took a different approach at the beginning, took a more aggressive approach, who have actually been successful in their efforts to have schools open at 3 feet of distancing with barriers as is required in the guidance. If you go below 6 feet, you're required to have a mask and you need to have a barrier. So we have empirical evidence that a distance of at least 3 feet mitigates risk significantly. We also have anecdotal evidence from peer schools that it is possible to open our schools safely. So that's really why things have changed at this point. We're in a new position to look at things differently. We also recognize the barriers in the guidance give us additional factors of helping us visibly to remember to stay distant as we approach coming back to school. And that was echoed by the medical professionals on our task force. So given that, we have built a plan to work to reopen all of our schools this spring. So this is the proposal as it stands today. We are looking to bring all of our elementary schools back to full-time in-person instruction, grades K through 5 all at once on April 12th. We talked about, do we phase in grades? Do we bring them in grade level bands? Or do we bring everybody back at once? And from the building level perspective, the logistics of doing it all at once really made the most sense. The reason we're waiting a little bit after spring break, a variety of reasons, we have seen through every break period throughout this year that we've had a spike in cases following the vacation period, especially when there's holidays, and we do have a couple holidays over the upcoming spring break. So we wanted to, instead of trying to bring everyone back and then winding up in a position where we're having to do mass significant quarantines or shutting schools back down, thought the best approach is to wait the week after the holiday break. We will remain open. We'll remain in the hybrid after spring break for that week, but do one more week of hybrid. And then the following week, beginning Monday, April 12th, is when all elementary students would be welcome back all together. We will basically at that point, that really means eliminating the current cohorted hybrid at the elementary. Since we can no longer do that at 6 feet, we will no longer need the A and B cohorts. We will be shifting into this full-time in-person model at that point. Waiting this long also really is helpful in a couple other ways. It allows for more staff to be fully vaccinated. We're really fortunate in that our staff has very much embraced the opportunity to get vaccinated, and thankful to our elected officials, both George Latimer, Amy Paulin, and Alessandra Biaggi. All of them have been very instrumental in advocating on our behalf and getting us access, especially at the county level, to vaccinations. So we already have, at this point, we know at least 50% of our teachers have been vaccinated. By the time we come back from spring break, we know that 50%, at least 50% of our entire staff will be fully vaccinated. They'll have both shots and have had that waiting period. So we'll be very, very well positioned once we get back from spring break in that regard, which is an important mitigation strategy. Certainly we'll have warmer weather, which is going to better enable us to use outdoor space. The winter months have been cold. Some of your children have been doing great, wearing hats and coats, and even in the classroom, and trying to keep as much fresh air in the rooms as possible. Warmer weather gives us greater opportunity for the windows to be open more, but then also for classes to be outside. And also it gives us some lead time to allow for furniture setup and equipment, obtaining equipment and distribution. All districts continue to struggle with supply line issues. So this will give us just a little bit more lead time to make sure that we have everything there that we need to be ready to go for a successful implementation. At the secondary level, high school and the middle school, they will begin phase in at some point during April. It's dependent on a couple things, that being really further assessment of our capacity to bring all students back, which we'll talk about a little bit more in an upcoming slide. Also relates to determinations from the Board of Regents on assessment dates, on state level assessments, and also our task force is working to determine if there are relevant metrics that may help us to gauge when we're ready to move in or move to the next phase, or when we should have issues that we may need to pull back from. So I think it's important, certainly now at this point, for parents to understand what is this going to look like. So we're going to begin with the elementary level. This is a photo of a classroom that's set back up at 3 feet distancing with full class capacity. Obviously, we don't have all the barriers there. I don't know if you can see the picture very well, but that is a full classroom of desks. So it looks very much more like what a normal classroom would be. Students are now 3 feet, and that's measured center of head to center of head. In the classrooms, we will continue to have the barriers. We're trying to get some new barriers that don't have that same white border to try to improve visibility. Each of the classrooms will be district-wide, will be outfitted with some additional items to supplement the air quality. Currently, all of our HVA systems are fully functioning. They've been serviced, filters have been changed. Anywhere that filters could be upgraded, they were. I believe we have everything especially in the conditioned buildings, a range of MERV filters from MERV, I believe it's 7 or 8 up through 13 in some places. That's not possible everywhere given the HVA systems, but everything is fully functioning to where we know that we're getting between 6 and 8 changeovers of air within all classrooms, at least 6 to 8 changeovers an hour within the classrooms, which is at the standard at which they should be performing. In addition to that, we will be putting box fans in windows in every classroom and to serve as an exhaust fan, so blowing outward to try to encourage even more airflow. And we're purchasing and we'll be placing air filtration units in all classrooms as well to improve the quality of the air. In addition to those mitigation strategies, certainly we're continuing to require students to wear masks and use their barriers. We already talked about the windows. The other piece that I would add to the puzzle, in addition to these key mitigation strategies, is a surveillance testing program. That's something we've been working on piloting to try to work out the kinks and the details. That is something that we really need everyone's help with. Our goal with that program is to establish a baseline of prevalence within the school community, and then also to have as a tool to monitor as we phase students back in. What was our baseline prior? Now that we've phased in, are we maintaining a similar or lower level, or are we seeing a spike anywhere that we need to address? Maybe it's change in mitigation strategies, maybe it's change in a step back in density. We need to be able to safely monitor the safety of our implementation as we move forward. So we will be asking your help in that endeavor. Our goal in that program is to test 20% students, 20% of our students monthly, students and staff monthly on a district-wide basis. It is a random testing process. It is meant to be consistent and broad, meaning that we have folks from every school participating on a regular basis, not the same 10% over and over, but that we're doing broad reach of involvement in that. Anyone who is coming in person for school, we are expecting to participate in that. There are forms, and I know you've probably seen a number of emails from Julia Kachung coming out this year. She is heading up this effort for us as well. So we'll be, again, pushing out more information to make sure that everyone is aware of how to access that, how to sign up for appointments, what forms are needed, so that we can get those appointments scheduled and get a regular routine in place. So at the elementary, as I said, we're looking for full return to school on April 12th. This is the anticipated bell schedule at the elementary level. So it's again a little bit expanded from what we've been doing now. So we're pushing the start time back to 8:30. That's a half hour earlier on the front end. We do still we've got more students. We need to make sure that we don't have gathering and crowds. So again, we need to continue with staggered arrival procedures. Lunch will continue to be about the same time of day. And then we're going to start our staggered dismissal around 2:40. So it's about 10 minutes earlier than it is now, but that's because we are now moving our office hours to the end of the day. You probably remember, elementary parents, we had originally morning and afternoon office hours. In one of our adjustments, we looked at the utilization and didn't feel the afternoon was used as much as the morning. So we eliminated that so we could expand the day. Now, in looking at the pattern of usage, what we're seeing is the morning time, while nice, and students often can check in one-on-one with their teachers and talk about their loose tooth or their dog that ran away, those kind of fun, important things. Those things can be handled through just through the normal morning meeting time, chance to connect with students, with teachers, and create that classroom learning community. So we still have that opportunity. We felt like we needed the opportunity, though, to check in particular with our fully virtual students at the end of the day on the academic needs and progress. So by moving that to the end of the day, we think we're going to be able to capture better the needs of those learners. And this is going to provide us a more targeted way to continue to support our full virtual learners in a way that's meaningful, because then they can bring any questions from the work they've done or instruction they've done throughout the day, ask questions, get immediate feedback, actionable feedback from their teacher while the learning is still fresh. And then finally, as I said before, some things will of course be building specific. So your principals will be sending more information as we draw closer to April 12th. We are continuing at this point, though, with our early release on Wednesday. Because our full virtual students will still be at home and the teachers will have the cameras in the classroom and managing both the students in class and those at home, we continue to have that instructional dynamic that they're navigating. So we need to, at this time, continue with that opportunity to give them additional planning time, professional development, and meeting time on Wednesdays. Just a couple more points of information regarding lunch. Elementary students have been eating their lunch in the classroom. Basically, that is going to continue, but now we are moving that distance down to 3 feet with the barriers. So the barriers are going to be significantly important during the lunch period because that is the time when students are in class without their mask. So certainly there could be opportunities for teachers to, depending on spacing, if they wanted to do half and half, they may have every other student take their mask off and eat while the others do quiet activity and then switch. Things like that, logistical things like that will be worked out at the classroom level. But we wanted to be clear as we present this and as we're going to be asking parents to make a selection about what they're doing for the remainder of the year, to be very transparent about the conditions. So students will be seated at those desks like we showed at the beginning of this section, 3 feet apart with just barriers while they're eating lunch. Obviously, if we can go outside to eat lunch, that would be wonderful. And that flexibility will be there as schools are able to do that. If there's larger spaces, they can do that. If there's a way to space out within the classroom, like going to the reading nook or the rug, those things, of course, we'll use as we are able. But we want to be very clear that students will be sitting 3 feet apart. Now, and again, I go back to the anecdotal evidence we've gotten from colleague districts. They've been doing this since the fall and have been successful in places like Long Island. So we believe it is a successful and safe strategy. With this return to school, we really, again, it's another area we're asking for cooperation. This year, being a pandemic has really demanded flexibility of everyone, and we have been flexible with families because we recognize that we all just needed that little bit of extra. So what has happened though as a result of some of that, in some cases, certainly when there's health, when there's required quarantines, those types of things, we have to remain flexible in those areas. But what has happened, there's been a lot more flexibility for things that traditionally are not flexibilities or reasons for excused absences from school. So it's become a bit of a revolving door in some ways where it really isn't supported by mandated quarantine or illness. So what we need really is to ask everyone, once we come back, we're really trying to make this a successful in-person experience. We need to somewhat buckle down and really commit to being in school every day. It's particularly important because in doing this, we're looking at the building principles between now and April 12th. We'll be looking at which students are returning, how many students are in that class, what's the square footage of that class, and do I have enough space to space all the desks at 3 feet? Do we have the large classes in the large classrooms, the small classes in the small classrooms? Do we need to make some switches? And then there's a lot of logistical and human resource work that needs to happen to make this work. We're confident we can do this at the elementary school, but we need a commitment. It's not fair to folks, to other students, or to our staff for people to commit and say they're coming and then not be reliably in school. So we are asking you to make a firm commitment. These are the attendance expectations we'll be looking for, that if student who's a full-time in-person student is there every day. If they're sick, they should stay home and take a sick day, like good old-fashioned sick days like they used to. And as usual, we're going to continue to need that negative COVID test upon return, unless other documentation has already been provided with ongoing illness issues that explain the symptoms. We are asking that students only access the virtual learning experience. Only full-time in-person students only access the virtual. If they're on a mandated quarantine by the Department of Health, or if they're awaiting test results because they couldn't pass the daily screener. So I'm sure you all have had days, wake up with a sore throat or the runny nose, you can't pass the screener, so the child stays home, which is the right thing to do, but then you have to get a COVID test to return, which is the right thing to do. We want those students to be able to continue to access it because we want parents to continue to keep children home if they're not well. So we will honor that. But things like vacations, travel, at the secondary level, we see it a lot. Out of 24 students staying home on test days, things like that really have to be curtailed at this point in time if this is going to be successful. Those parents who do not want this or are not comfortable with the setting that I just laid out, we will still have our fully remote learning opportunity available, the same one that we've had in place since school started. So families may still choose full remote if they've been on fully remote, may remain on fully remote. If you haven't been, but are not comfortable with what has been described here, you have the choice at this point for the rest of the year to move to fully remote. And it will work the same way it has throughout the year with Google Meet and Google Classroom. Teachers will be expected to maintain use of the Google Classroom for assignments and those type of things, so that virtual students can still continue to have access to all the appropriate learning materials. As I said earlier, we do have the office hours at the end of the day at the elementary to support the full virtual students in particular. It'll be really time more focused on them, as opposed to in the past, it was supporting any student on their virtual day. This really will be time dedicated to the full virtual students. We also have a work group on the task force that's looking at how do we continue to support teachers in supporting students who are fully virtual, because there is a common sense, little dynamic that's going to change with more students in the classroom. Teachers' attention obviously has to be on the students in the classroom management, making sure that everyone is safe and doing what we need to do. So it's to be expected that there may be a little bit of a shift of attention, but we want to make sure that our fully virtual students still continue to get quality education. And just as a point of note, especially for elementary, we don't know yet if we're still going to have to provide a remote learning opportunity in the fall. But what we do know is if we have to provide that, then we will be looking to set up dedicated full virtual teachers in the fall if need be. We will likely be surveying about that before this year is out, as we would need to set up our class lists and our staffing over the summer as such. So more to come on that. So at this point, really, this is what I've been talking about. We really need this firm commitment from families for space reasons, for teacher planning. They need to know who's coming in each day because it really does impact their instructional preparation. And as I said, everyone's decisions do have consequences for other people, whether it's custodians and principals having to move classrooms, teachers having to adjust on the fly for who's in person versus who's at home. So this is really important for us. We will be launching a survey tomorrow, so you can watch your email for that, asking parents. It's not really just a survey, it's really a commitment form, asking parents to make a choice between the full in-person and the full virtual so that we can then assess how many students will be coming back and make sure that our classrooms are set up to accommodate those student requests. This will be due at noon on March 17th, St. Patty's Day. I know that there are parent-teacher conferences that day, so we do ask that you fill it out that day by noon. If there are conversations that happen that cause you to change your opinion, we can manage that on a case-by-case basis, but we are asking that everyone do their best to complete that commitment survey by noon on Wednesday. And of course, we're on family info sessions right now. So very quickly, going to the secondary level, you're going to hear some similarities here. So they'll help us to expedite the conversation. So this is a photo. These are obviously adults. These are some teachers who volunteered for the photo op. But this gives you a little sense of what a secondary classroom is going to look like at 3 feet. Now, 3 feet from the center of my head to the center of another adult's head is very different than 3 feet from the center of a third grader's head to a third grader's head. We're using that same measurement, but obviously bigger bodies, it's going to really be closer, physically going to be closer. This setup really looks much more like normal spacing in a classroom. But this is what it will look like. We'll have the same additional HVAC air cleaning equipment added to the secondary rooms as well. Surveillance testing, I feel, is even more critical at the secondary level. Research has shown us and our own experience has showed us that there's more spread amongst older students. So it's really critical that we know what is going on within our schools. I think we all conceptually know that there's less spread in schools than there is outside of schools, but we need to make sure that that remains the case, and that we all know comes from behavior, but we need to be able to test that. So again, we're expecting anyone who's coming to in-person instruction to be participating in our surveillance testing program. The other piece, and this goes back to the attendance conversation, it's been even more of an issue at the secondary level. When students are expected to attend, they are expected to be there. And this all the more will be all the more important at the secondary level. And I'll talk about that in just a minute, because literally it's not just that a classroom might have been moved or a teacher may have planned, but we may be in a position where one student who commits to coming to full-time instruction but then doesn't show may actually be taking a seat away from another student who wants to be here full-time. Again, we'll, excuse me. Sorry, we've got a lockdown drill going on, so you just got a little insight into that. Copy, Mr. Johnson. We are as well at the high school continuing our fully remote model. So this is the challenge that we have at the middle school and high school. In doing our assessment of classroom space, at least 50% of the middle school and 65 approximately in both of those % of our classrooms cannot achieve 3-foot distancing of students at 100% capacity. And that's just a function of the age of our classrooms, size of our classrooms, and the enrollment. You remember back those who were following the district's work during the bond referendum back in 2018. That's part of our issue. We are, it's a great thing. Our community is growing, but our schools are at capacity. In particular, the secondary schools at this point in time. So room utilization is maxed out, which means, excuse me, room utilization really speaks to how often the rooms are used. So if we have 9 periods a day, we have 50 classrooms. Ideally, those rooms would be used about 75% of the time. So there'd be some open time and space. 75% is about the ideal. Our rooms are used about 98% of the time, which means 9 periods a day. Some rooms are used, 8 periods a day, some are used, and pretty much nothing less than that. Everything's used 8 or 9, which means that there's very little flexibility. So for example, if we have a large class in a smaller classroom, there may not be a bigger classroom to move it to. And that becomes a problem at times like this when we need flexibility. It also means if we, like some other schools, if let's say we had a class that could hold 22 students at 3-foot distancing, but there's 25 students in that scheduled for that class. So you have 3 that don't fit. In some cases, schools might be able to set up a satellite classroom where basically an overflow. Anyone who's on the overflow, you go there, you zoom into your class, and you can watch it remotely. We don't even have space for that because we don't have empty rooms to set up satellite classrooms. So these are challenges that are somewhat unique to Pelham because of our facilities and our growing enrollment. Those of you at the secondary know that we have basically one cafeteria area. Even though it's cafeteria A, B, and C, it's one space that really will only accommodate the students from the one building, middle school plus a few more students. So we, for years, have had an open campus at the high school for that very reason. Our facility can't fit all of our students at once for lunch. We've expanded open campus to 9th grade this year. We're going to be continuing that. But that is an added challenge because, again, other districts have repurposed cafeteria space for classroom space. We can't do that. Can't use it for satellite. In our case, we're actually using one of our gyms as overflow lunch space so that we can still maintain 6 feet in our cafeterias and in our lunch space at the secondary building. And just as a point of information, we are planning to maintain the 6 feet at the secondaries because, again, those are bigger children, and we know that there's more spread amongst older children. So we want to try to maintain the 6-foot distancing there when they do not have their masks on, to try to keep the safer position for the older kids. So we're already repurposing our gyms, one of our gyms every day for lunch. On rainy days when physical education classes can't go outside, recess can't go outside, students can't go eat outside, we now need more space inside for lunch, which is going to mean taking over more of our gym space, which then displaces physical education programs and potentially other programs. So that's really a lot of the problems that we've been looking at as we've been problem solving around how do we return our students back to school. So really this brings us to a point. We've got a number of plans already in place, but we can't move further in our planning without key information about who will be returning. So again, this goes back to the survey, the commitment survey that will be going out on Friday. We need to know how many students plan to come back and commit to coming back so that we can finalize our planning at the high school. Based on the survey, the initial interest survey that went out a few weeks ago, it looked like potentially 75% of students may come back in person. We need a firm commitment to know if that is the number. And if that is the case, then our building administrators need the time to literally go class by class, student by student, room by room, to assess, can we get 3 feet in all of those rooms or not? Ideally, we want to try to get everyone, 100% of those who want to come back. That's our goal. But because of these limitations, we may not be able to achieve that level of distancing. So if more students want to come back than we can accommodate, then we may need to look at a modified version of our hybrid. Right now, we're at a 50% hybrid. We've got plans. We could look at a 66%. We could try to find a model of a 75 or an 80%, where maybe instead of 2 days a week, maybe students are coming 4 days a week on a rotating basis. Maybe they're in 4, out 2, something like that, so that we can. so that we can increase our in-person time for as many students as possible. And this is why I go back to the idea, especially at the secondary level, if students are committing to full-time in person, we need them here in the seats. They cannot be choosing to stay out when they feel like staying out or for other reasons that are not excused absences. Because in this case, if we can't fit 100% of who wants to come back and we're forced into a modified hybrid, then we literally are taking seats away from other students who want to be here. So commitment is important. Your choices matter to others. So as I said, we do still have other plans in place though. Once we determine how many students we can bring back, we do plan to bring students back in this order at some point starting in April. So again, we're still waiting for data to come in. We're waiting for decisions from the department, the Board of Regents next week related to assessments, and waiting to finish some discussions about metrics with our task force. Those pieces are in process and we will have those nailed down in these next probably 2 weeks. So in April, we do plan to start phasing middle school and high school back if all signs point to yes. This is the order. We begin with 8th and 12th grade. 8th grade, it's the first year they have Regents exams. 12th grade, our 12th graders lost the end of last year and they have not been all in school together this year. So it's their last chance to be in. So we would look to start with them. Next would be our 6th and 9th graders. 6th graders and 9th have not been all together in middle school yet. They've been cohorted, but they really haven't had a full all together experience of middle school. And the same thing for our 9th graders. They have not had that full all in together experience of high school. So we want to get them back next. And then we would complete out the phase in with our grade 7, 11, and 10. Important to note, our hybrid students will continue to attend while we start to phase in these other grades. So for example, the first phase in, we'll have 6th and 7th graders will continue on their cohort A-B days, but then once we start the phase in of 8, they will come every day and see how that works, and then we'll build to the next grade. So it will remain regular hybrid for the other grades while we phase in the grades in this order. Bell schedules will likely be adjusted, but we will send information out about that at the time. And this is what the bell schedule will look like. This is really basically almost back to a full normal bell schedule for the high school. The only real difference here is a 5-minute passing time between classes instead of the typical 3-minute. And we've been using that during the hybrid model to reduce density in the hallways because that is the one time where students are likely closer than 3 feet. That has been useful to have that time. We feel especially as we're doubling the number of students back in the buildings, we need to maintain that additional passing time. We will continue to have academy at the end of the days. We may designate whether some of those are for in-person and some are for virtual. Conversations are ongoing on that, but we will still have academy period. And again, that's a perfect opportunity to continue to support our fully virtual students. And at the secondary, we will also continue to have our early release on Wednesday for the same reasons. Again, we need a commitment. The surveys will be going out tomorrow. Responses due by noon on St. Patrick's Day. So finally, it really does take a community. March 11th, we've got an info session tonight. It's going to be all the same information, so don't feel like you have to tune back in tonight if you were able to be here tomorrow. I already talked about the survey. We all just need to continue to really buckle down in this last couple of months. We all want our students to be here and to have as much in-person time as possible, get the best educational experience possible. These are the things we've asked all along, and we ask you to continue to do those as we round out the school year and work towards bringing everyone back. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to take some questions in this order. So I know we had, let me go to the chat. All right, sure enough, we've got some. So I do have some of my administrative colleagues on the call. I may call on them from time to time to assist with questions. So Julia, you're gonna be my first up. So the question is, can we send our kids at this point in time for COVID testing? Julia, I don't know if I see you on the call or not. We do have COVID testing going on at this point in time. I believe an email was sent out to elementary families to sign up. And I do think most slots initially were filled, which was great. I would say, since Julia is not here with us, um, yes, you can still sign up. Speak to your principal or your school nurse about how to get signed up for testing. For working parents, will kids be able to get tested after school? Yes. So there is a consent form that needs to be signed by the parent. But as long as you send that form in and the child is scheduled, we've been doing testing right after school on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, right at the schools. Um, and Wednesdays we've been set up to do a large group testing here at the high school campus. So our goal is to test about 100 students on that half Wednesday. It's one of the many things that we're able to facilitate because of that. So as long as a child has the consent form, they can be tested without their parent present. If a parent wants to be there, they just need to make their wishes known, and the nurses will work with you to accommodate that request. Why can't we have a dedicated virtual teacher for fully virtual students? So we contemplated earlier in the year, back in November, we took a survey because we did have a significant number of fully virtual students. We, at that time, not enough students were willing to shift off of their regular teacher onto to a fully virtual students, to a fully virtual teacher. We had about maybe 20 students district-wide, K through 5. So it really we would not have been able to set up a meaningful learning opportunity for those students, given it would have been a one-room schoolhouse, virtual schoolhouse of 6 different grades with 1 or 2 teachers. And we were not wanting to force students to leave the teacher in the class that they'd already established a really close relationship with. So that's why we didn't make the move in November. For all those same reasons, that's why we're not making the move now. But we are working with the task force and the administrative team to try to make sure that we provide teachers the support they need to be able to support fully virtual and in-person students. And we're also looking at ways to continue to support the fully virtual students, both academically and socially and emotionally. The task force is working on that now, and there should be some information about that when the task force recommendations and report come in. Can we send in tests that were conducted outside of school? Yes, you're welcome to send those in. You can again send those, I believe, to your principal or to Julia Chung in the PPS office. We would love to have those. Any results just kind of help us to meet those goals. And yes, as I said, parents can be present for testing. You just need to arrange that with the school nurse. The test is not a molecular PCR test. It's a Binex rapid test. So we recognize certainly not as accurate as the PCR test. It's also not good enough for us to allow reentry, and you still need a PCR test to return to school after symptoms or illness. If anyone has folks who are unable to get into the Google Meet, please let them know that the meeting is being streamed. Yes. Okay. Currently, full virtual elementary students were able to interact with that day's virtual cohort and breakout rooms. How will fully virtual students interact with classmates now that all of them are in the classroom? I think that's one of the things that's still to be worked out, just being honest. I do think there will likely continue to be 1 or 2 handful of fully virtual students in most classes at the elementary level based on the initial survey, which tells me that teachers are going to still be continuing to use Google Classroom and Google Meet as long as they have full virtual students. And I know what I've seen, especially at the upper grades, is teachers are using the Chromebooks a lot in the class as well. So there may still be continue to be opportunities for collaboration, but it's those kind of questions that the task force is grappling with, because we don't want students to feel completely isolated and separated from the in-person class if they're the fully virtual student. So we're doing some more work and planning around that. How will quarantine requirements change now that there will only be 3 feet? So the quarantine requirements have not yet changed. They will remain the same. So could that result in more students being sent into quarantine if there's a positive case? Yes, I think that's the honest answer to that question. The radius that we've been using is to determine if a student is positive or teacher is positive. It's generally a 6-foot radius around them. With the elementary program hybrid, that has really still meant, just given the nature of elementary interactions, that we've had to quarantine basically the whole class. At the secondary, we've been able to be a little bit more strategic in that they tend to be more stationary, and we have seating charts. So we use a seating chart to determine who sits within that 6-foot radius. So that is the potential. We could have more quarantines. That is a little bit of a trade-off. The good news, I would say, though, we just got notice from the state this morning that those who are fully vaccinated no longer, well, this is very simplified, so go read the guidance, but from a simplified perspective, teachers who are fully vaccinated do not have to quarantine when returning from travel. We're hoping that also applies. We're still waiting for a little bit more clarification. We're hoping that also will apply for exposures, to where someone who's fully vaccinated does not have to quarantine if they're exposed, because as you all know, predominantly it's been staffing that has caused our closures throughout this year. So if our staff who are vaccinated no longer have to quarantine, that should reduce our closures. Even if we are still quarantining within classrooms, we're hoping that significantly reduces the need to close. What exactly is a measure of success? That's a hard question to answer in these day and age. I think not having to close our schools down would be great. I think not having to retreat back to hybrid would be a great indicator. We're still working with the task force on the idea of how many positive or what percentage of positive cases is problematic. At this point, we're looking just for a baseline to start with, and then we'll monitor if there's significant fluctuations. So we hope to come back again in the final task force report with some information on metrics. Is COVID testing going to become mandatory? I wish it could. So that's been a struggle. Initially, we believed that we could, and the state education department sent a memo saying that we could not mandate that education or participation activities be contingent upon that. So that has been a challenge. So one of the challenges, and you raised the question of athletes, this is a struggle. This is another area that we need help. The Board of Education reluctantly approved high-risk sports. The state approved them, the section approved them, then they passed the buck down to the county to see if they allowed it, then they passed the buck down to the districts to say if they allowed it. Really, no one wanted to allow it, but no one actually wanted to make the tough decision not to allow it. We approved it with the understanding that our student athletes would be participating in the surveillance testing program. We've been having some struggles with that. So we are taking a different approach. We're trying some different approaches to trying to make that happen. That's something that is an ongoing effort. And we're hoping that we can get some better participation there, because the whole purpose of it is baseline monitoring, but it's also to make sure what's going on in our schools is safe, which is why we need everyone participating. Of course, we can't solely test athletes. That is something that's also come from the state. And for it to be meaningful surveillance testing, it needs to be broad testing. So all students are being asked to participate. So more to come on that. How many students in middle school and high school are currently enrolled in virtual only? I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I think we've wavered everywhere from between 15 to 25%. I didn't know if Mr. Berkowitz or Ms. Sabia wanted to weigh in on that.
I can jump in. We're at about 27% at the high school level. So about 246 students at the high school level are presently indicated as full virtual.
Thank you.
We're about the same, a little bit less in the middle school, and it changes day to day on a daily basis. We could get up to 10 emails where parents want their children to be fully virtual. So it's kind of like a living document.
Yeah, and some of that is the revolving door that we're, as Ms. Sabia mentioned, the revolving door that we kind of need to bring to a little bit of a pause. Will there be a deadline set for teachers and staff to reach 100% vaccination? We are also not able to require vaccination. The vaccinations were approved on an emergency basis, so we cannot require. We have made tremendous progress in this area because all of our collective bargaining units have been incredibly supportive of the effort, and they've been helping us with assessing the levels of vaccination, getting information to teachers, to staff, to make sure that they had access. So we're really well positioned. We think that we will likely be, we'll probably max out at about 75% of the staff being vaccinated. once those who are able to or who want to be vaccinated get vaccine. But we're very close, I think, to hitting that mark. What if you choose full-time in person, but after a week or two, your child is not comfortable and need to switch? That's a conversation I would have with your building principal. It is easier to move in that direction than it is to choose full virtual and come back because, again, of all the space issues. Again, we don't want it to be a fluid back and forth, but individual conversations, particular needs should be directed to the building principals. Okay. Yeah. Just reading this longer one. Okay. Okay, there's not a question there, so I'm going to go on to the next one. So question about parties on weekends amongst high school students. So this is a tricky question because our authority is within the school system. Those things that have a direct connection to disruption of the school, that's the only place that we can extend our authority. We can't police those things that happen outside of school that are not connected to us, have no, and it's hard to say have no impact because we all know they do have impact. There's a limitation to our authority on some of that, and we do struggle with that same question as well. Certainly, I know I'm looking at Mr. Berkowitz, who's nodding his head because I know he's had many difficult conversations this year with parents, with students. Families been asked to keep children home when we've had evidence of people not adhering to that health contract. And it is hard to stare evidence in the face and not do something about it. So when we can, we do. But this is again an area where if people want their children back in school, they need to commit to the behaviors that will allow their child to be back in school and will not endanger others. I don't know if Mr. Berkowitz, if you want anything to add to that, because I know you've been dealing with this on a regular basis.
Thank you, Dr. Champ. I mean, I think it's important to restate that we have said from go, as Dr. Champ has reasserted throughout, that like we're each responsible for one another. So as the district is moving to welcome students back into the building for families or children whose priority is potentially going to put others at risk, we would ask for them not to opt in to return full-time. It's very difficult for us to enforce, as Dr. Champ said, but when or if we have information that is directly shared with us, we take appropriate action. Our goal is to try to make sure that everyone is taking care of one another, recognizing these complications.
Thank you. So the next question has to do with not feeling safe with 3 feet at lunch, but also not feeling that full remote is untenable or is a tenable solution. So I guess this really is unfortunately, like every other issue that I think we've faced since this pandemic began, there is no one plan that is going to meet the needs of everyone. And so we've tried throughout this to make decisions that could be safe for as many as possible and that could be substantive. So we do believe that full virtual will still continue to be a viable educational experience for students. We do believe, based on research that we've looked at and based on speaking to colleagues who've been doing this, that a 3-foot distancing with barriers at lunch can be safely conducted. And we have to work off of the information that we have to make the best decisions we can for as many people as we can. There's no real way to also maintain the hybrid within this. And really that goes back to the fact as what I said before. Right now, when we say hybrid, we're talking about 50% of students in with 6-foot distancing. If we bring more students in, we by default have less distancing. So the hybrid as it exists can't coexist with a full-time in-person model, especially given space limitations. So it really unfortunately puts us in a position of having these two as the only options that we're able to present once we move in this direction. That's why it was really important for us to do that survey a few weeks back to really understand the will of the community. And I do know there were a number of hybrid parents reached out to myself and to the board directly because they didn't feel that they could answer that survey honestly because they didn't have the choice that really reflected their opinion. So I respect and appreciate them reaching out so we knew that information. Even when we factor in those reach outs, there was still a predominant majority of the community preferring the full-time in-person experience, even at a 3 feet distancing for their children. So that's where we really have to go to where we can meet the best meet the needs of the most. And principals, teachers will continue to work with all families to make sure that their children's needs are being met, especially if they're choosing to be in the full virtual model. Again, a question about vaccinations. We are not able to require staff to be vaccinated. We have been providing assistance and resources for getting appointments. So we're actually, I think, in a really good place and should be going. We already know we'll be at least 50% full staff by the time we come back from spring break, and we anticipate getting up to about 75% within about a month or so after that. Okay. So, question about children with IEPs and 504s being in the first wave back. So certainly at the elementary level, that will be an all-in, all at once. So for sure, they will be in there as soon as we move back to those who aren't already back will be included in that phase back of the elementary school because it's an all-in at once. As we assess the space related to the secondary levels, that's what we'll be able to determine how much space do we have, how many of the students to return, can we allow to return, and then how do we structure that return, being it, to your point, prioritize students who are in greater need, and what percentage of students can we bring back. So yes, that will be part of our planning as we look at the secondary if we can't bring all in at once. Can testing on Wednesday be moved to right after school? That's something we can certainly look at with Julia. Originally, our thought was to allow students to go home, get lunch, come back. But to your point, many of them are not coming back. Our nurses do need a little bit of break for lunch themselves, so that's another just logistical piece, but we can definitely look at restructuring if that might be a more successful model. And again, surveillance testing, will it be mandatory? We're not in a position to mandate, but we are strongly expecting everyone to participate. So if you want to be with your child when they're tested, we'll make those accommodations. But again, we really need this for a baseline and for monitoring how successful our phase-in is. And if there are additional mitigation strategies that we need in place, we don't want to create a situation where there's spread in the schools and we don't know about it. What level of fully virtual participation would trigger a need for dedicated fully virtual instructors? That's tough to answer just as a number. If we had numbers back in November, I guess maybe I'll give you for instance, if we had if we had enough students across the district where you could have put maybe all the kindergartners and first graders together with one teacher. So the equivalent of about, let's say anywhere from around 20, give either side of 20 K-1 that had decided to go fully virtual, that would have made sense to put them with one teacher. So if you could have done 2 grade bands, is probably as broad as you could go. But we had 20 students across 6 grades across the district. So it was not a viable instructional model. But something around that level would be something I think that we could begin to consider. The issue that we ran into then and the issue we ran into now, it likely will run into now, is that families don't want to move away from their current classroom teacher. So to get a critical mass of folks to leave their current teacher for these last couple of months of school in order to do that, we're not anticipating that. If we see that as a pattern, that gives us the data we need to reconsider that. But we didn't see that in November. The year is almost over. We're figuring we're less likely to see that. But if we do see numbers at that scale, we will take a second look and consider that. If more students opt to return full-time at the elementary than we anticipate, can you maintain 3 feet? We do believe we can. We certainly would have to do a lot of classroom moves, maybe into libraries, into some other spaces, but we do expect that we can deliver it at the elementary school. Will mask wearing be rigorously enforced in classes and hallways? That is our goal all the time. And yes, one of the things we will ask, especially at the younger grades where the kids don't have as much sense of themselves, well-fitting masks are really important. So we do ask the parents send them. I think my guess is this question might be more at the secondary level. So yes, so yeah, that we're going to have to definitely double down and reinforce that because you're right, we're going to have greater density. Masks are going to be all the more important, especially when we're during passing time in hallways and especially during lunch. Well, lunch, they're going to be without masks, but that passing time during the hallways and times where they're not necessarily in class, we're going to have to really strongly reinforce those things. And I know the administrators can help support that if teachers, bring issues to their attention. Or the monitors, if anyone brings it to attention, we do enforce that, and we'll need to really heighten the awareness around that. Plans and measures are in place for meeting additional emotional needs for students that may emerge as we move back to full-time is a great question. We have a task force that's working on that specific question because we recognize students who are staying fully virtual are going to, potentially still have more isolation issues. So we want to make sure that we've got things in place for them. Students who are coming back who have been away from one another for the last year. I think you're right. We should not underestimate the anxiety, stress that may produce. So Julia Chung is working with the clinicians and with the task force to plan some things around how do we best support those students. So I don't have that information now, but that information will be forthcoming, likely through your principals as we get towards the actual return to school dates. How will the quality of desk barriers be addressed? Classes at full capacity will make it even more difficult to see the smart boards. Yes, agreed. So we have been looking into different barriers. The kind that we have are approved. They are ones that other schools who are doing 3 feet distancing are using as far as just the trifold approach. We're trying to find newer ones that don't have the white edging. The problem is the edging is what makes them more durable and more structural. But we're trying to find ones that don't have that border so that we've got better visibility for students. So we've got some samples on order and we're going to be putting in orders. Again, supply chain will certainly be an issue as to how quickly those come, but we are in the process of getting those orders together to get better visibility. Would you recommend considering guidance for each child should be test every times a week so we can get an even distribution? We're thinking through the details of surveillance testing. Our challenge is capacity. Right now it's on our school nurses and athletic trainer to do all the testing themselves, which really limits which is why we're at about a 5% goal on a weekly basis, just to manage capacity of what we can do. We're trying to reach out and see if there are testing companies who might have better capacity so they could come in and do it on a more regular basis and ease that burden on our nurses. And that may even make the timeframes of when it can be done more flexible. But we are trying to aim at a certain rotation. And I don't have those exact numbers in front of me, but Julia Chung is working with the nurses on a reasonable rotation so we can try to spread it around in a manageable amount. How will chorus band and gym be accommodated? I think it depends on the level. Right now, physical education has been going on at all levels, outdoor when it can be, indoor when it can't, or when the activity is an indoor activity. Chorus and band at the secondary level have been accommodated with band. We were able to buy some covers, bell covers, bags for the winds, etc., certain specific masks so that they're able to play, but again, keeping them 12-foot distanced. Chorus has been, I believe, humming, and we're hoping that with the warm weather, we can maybe do some more use of outside for those. At the elementary, phys ed's being handled the same way. Worst case, we've had to do it in the classroom when outside or bad weather or gym is not available. Lessons, I think, are continuing. We, at this point, have not taken the step towards ensembles at the elementary level. That's something that's on the list to be discussed. We may or may not get all the way there this spring. And that's a good reminder to me just that to say, you know, this is a full-time return in person does not mean we're fully back to normal. It's not going to look normal. It's not going to feel normal in a lot of ways. But also we want to be cautious that we concentrate on getting a successful implementation of back in the classroom before we start then bringing back everything outside of the classroom. So we just ask you give us some time on those type things, even things like clubs and performances and activities, end of year type normal activities. We may or may not get all the way there. We're certainly trying, we're going to be creative, but right now our focus is on getting the students back in the classroom and being successful at that effort. What is school's responsibility to enforce masks on property after school hours? This is a struggle. This has been brought up by community members to us, and I very much appreciate the question. We can only enforce what we're staffed for, what we're here for. We do have on our playgrounds, I believe we have, and I know that I asked Jim Rickey and our facilities department to double check. We have signage on the playgrounds about masking and mask requirements. So our local police departments actually can enforce that in off hours. If we're not here to do the enforcing, calls can be placed to them for enforcement because the signage is there. So they've been great partners with us. I know they can't always necessarily handle the demands of masks when they've got potentially other responsibilities, but we've been trying to get the masking signage in place, so at least it's there. And certainly if any of our school personnel are there, they should be enforcing that on school property. Will windows be open for airflow? Yes. There's only, there are, just as a point of information, the middle school is our one fully conditioned building. So there are some windows there that do not open. They will have the air purifiers. Also, it's to note their air circulation because of the air conditioned system is actually better than the non-air conditioned building. So they're already getting more airflow into the classrooms. And we did, Jim, if I could put you on the spot again on a filter question, we did upgrade our filters as much as possible. Can you just remind me the MERV levels that we've got at the middle school?
Yes, Dr. Champ. So we range between MERV 8 and 13, and we went to the highest level possible wherever the equipment can handle it.
Thank you. Yep, and with the warmer weather, that's going to allow us to have those windows open even more. So appreciate that question. You're welcome for the presentation. So what is a percentage of, oops, sorry, my chat just jumped. What was the percentage of participation in the initial survey? Many families feel they did not have an option to express their preference for the hybrid. So we actually had a really great overall response rate. It was probably the biggest response rate of any survey that we've put out since I've been here. It was over 2,000 respondents, and we have 2,800 students attending the district. So it was a very high response rate. As I said earlier, we do recognize that there were many families that didn't feel that they felt they were very comfortable with the hybrid and did not feel they could complete the survey given they were not given that choice on the last question. I know I had probably, I'd say almost 24 parents reach out directly with that feedback to me. So when we reviewed the numbers, I certainly, kept that in the calculus. But even with those added into the results, the majority of the parents in the community still did select the full-time in person, most significantly at the elementary level, and then a little bit less at the middle, a little bit less at the high school, but in all cases, it was well over 50% at all levels. And another from YouTube. So when did we shift away from relying on CDC-based guidance, and how are we more comfortable taking more aggressive steps? So, there has the look at guidance really, to be honest, from the beginning, our main requirement is not reliance on CDC, it's reliance on the New York State Department of Health guidance and the New York State Education Department guidance. But where those differ, the Department of Health prevails. So that really has been our primary guiding force from the beginning. What has changed since then has enable districts to, and this has been a lot of conversation amongst districts at the superintendent level in particular, with the county departments of health, is to look at the studies that have come out, look at different guidance and different recommendations from people like the American Pediatric Association, and to see that a 3-foot distancing is, yes, it is more risk, but it is viewed in many cases as a manageable risk given the other risks that it outweighs on the social, emotional, and mental side for children. So that is where there's been some shift in interpretation, and all guidance is, as you will see if you start looking through the State Department of Health, or even CDC, it is not written in concrete black and white terms. There is always some leeway and some flexibility in there. So that's where schools have had just to work to navigate what is that middle ground where we feel like we're meeting the social, emotional, and mental wellness needs of our kids, but also making sure that we're meeting the physical health and safety needs of our kids and our staff. Will students that are fully vaccinated still need to quarantine or participate in COVID testing? Great question. It's the first time I've been asked that one. I would assume, I know students, right now it's only older students. We're still waiting for the final word as to whether fully vaccinated adults need to quarantine if exposed. I know what the CDC says, and we're hoping the state adopts that. We're hoping to know that in the next couple of days. I would assume if the state and CDC adopt that adults who are exposed and fully vaccinated don't need to quarantine, I would assume the same would be true for children if fully vaccinated. And participate in COVID testing, that's a great question. We'll have to do some more research on that. I don't want to speculate on that one. I want to do some more research on that one. Question, will the week after spring break be fully remote, or will schools be operating the hybrid model? We're planning for the week after spring break to be the hybrid model, and then the elementaries will start the full in-person return the following week. And will there be details shared about the percent of teachers vaccinated at each school? We're not going to get as granular as school level. A lot of, the vaccination information really still is considered to a degree medical personal health information. So we are sharing that about 50% of our teachers already are fully vaccinated, and we anticipate about 50% or more of staff to be vaccinated when we return from spring break. We see that growing to as high as about 75% district-wide once we're all in. We're not planning to get any more granular than that, out of respect for people's just medical situations. And that actually brings me to the end of the chat questions. So let's see. Oh, another question snuck in. If there's another surge from variants in the next few weeks, as is predicted, are there plans in place? This goes back to surveillance testing and the impacts of quarantines. I think, whereas for the beginning part of the year, we pivoted between hybrid and full virtual. Theoretically, there could be pivots between full in and hybrid. I don't know that any of us want to see that. That would be incredibly complicated. And we thankfully have not really seen any school closures in quite some time. I think since we came back from February break, I'm looking to my principals, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've had to do any full closure since we returned from February break.
No, I think we've been good. There was like a class on a cohort on a day or something like that, but schools, we've been open, we're going strong.
That's great. So to the degree that we continue with masking, we continue with all the mitigation strategies that have been working outside and inside of school. I know, just Dr. Fauci this morning, things are plateauing, which is not great news, but he also, forecasted once it plateaus, maybe it will start to continue to go back down. We'll have to keep an eye on things, but hopefully with vaccines being rolled out to the degree they are, we hopefully will not need to see the quarantine level from our staff that we've had over the past few months. And I'm hopeful that that will be the thing that keeps our schools open. So we'll have to keep monitoring, and surveillance testing again is all the more important. Another question, if more than 75 high school students opt for full-time in person, will the high school remain in the same hybrid model in now, or will it change? Still to be finalized, likely that will change some. Our goal is to get more students in school more often. So if we can't get 100%, we don't want to sit where we are at 50%. So yes, our goal would be to move to a model that would get them in school more often. I just don't know exactly what that percentage to give you right now. Okay. Right, well, I think with that, and you're all welcome for the presentation, very much appreciated. I think with that, we will bring it to a close for this morning. I very much appreciate your attention, great questions, and all your support. We look forward to having your kids back. We really, really do. We're excited about it, and we'll work with you to do everything we can to make it successful for every one of them. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.